Step number 1, pull your tire off.
Why am I replacing the CV anyway? Jill and I have just returned from a 20,000K four-wheel drive trip of remote WA, and that video series is currently running on the channel. During my routine service after this big trip, I noted that the passenger's CV boot had a large tear in it. Not sure how it happened, but it needs replacing. I carry a spare CV with me, so let's dust that unit off and install it into the vehicle today.
Check your brake rotors while you're there, especially if you've just done a 20,000 kilometer trip. Rotors look good. What about the pads? Pads are in good nick too. Well done. Now our next step is we want to get this dust cap off. Get yourself a hammer and your favorite screwdriver. Just work your way around the perimeter of the dust cap and lodge him free. That's nearly got him. Hallelujah. A little bit of water's got in there. You know, there's a little bit of rust there. Next thing we're gonna do is take the split pin out. And please don't go and reuse these split pins, you tight asses. Get yourself a new one. Split pin off. Little magical retainer off. Next thing, we gotta pull this nut off. That is a 39 mil 12-point nut, and that is a pretty unusual size. Now, where is it? There we go. You saw me digging around in my spares box for this socket. I would highly recommend that you carry one of these in your spares. I carry a spare CV so I can swap them out on the trail, and if I didn't have this socket, it ain't gonna happen. Now I'm gonna pretend I'm out in the bush and that I've only got my 18 volt cordless. Let's see whether that'll budge it. I highly doubt it. Nope, didn't touch it. What that means out in the bush is that I'd have to use my breaker bar and I have to get somebody to stand on the pedal and hold the brakes or wedge something between the caliper and the rotor. Now because I've got a 1/2 inch air impact, let's try that one. Sweet, got it. Next thing we're gonna do is take this little puppy off. It's just a little bracket that holds your brake line on. When I drop this hub assembly, I don't want to put stress on this line and potentially break it. There we go. That's just a little 12 mil bolt. And the brake line just slides out. Now I've got myself a ratchet strap up around the scrub bar and around the back of this hub supporting this hub. The reason for that is we're going to undo these two 22 millimeter bolts, and that's going to free this whole hub assembly to be able to swing around. And I want to support it because I don't want it drooping down on any brake lines. I have left the steering rack hooked up. I should be able to do this with that still hooked up. Those are 22 mil. I'm going to try my cordless again. Not touching it. That would be a breaker bar job in the bush. Well, my rattle gun wouldn't touch those, so it's breaker bar time. Here's one. She's coming. Two. Whew. Now I'm just going to put a bit of timber behind this hub to space it out a little bit. And now for the not so fun part. This is screwing the nut on backwards, like so. I'll get myself a block of timber as well, put it up against this, and I'm going to wail on that CV to get this end of the CV out of this hub assembly. All right, time for the fun part. Not. Are you moving? I think it is, very slowly. Yeah, she's going. There we go. Okay, let's see if we can get this end out. Come on, let go. Gotcha. That's one end of the CV. Now we got to move to the diff end and pop it out. First thing I'll do is jack this hub up onto the road. That means I got free and clear movement of the CV on the diff end. Okay, I am under the vehicle. There's our CV. I'm gonna try and pop him out. Okay, I've come back with a bigger lever. Leverage is your friend. There she goes. Okay, Mr. CV. Come to Papa. Gotcha. Okay, Mr. CV, come on out there. I put aftermarket jounce stops or bump stops on the car. I got a video for that in the library, But unfortunately, what I didn't realize was these aftermarket jounce stops prevent you from pulling the CV out. It fouls against that. So I'm going to have to undo that jounce stop to get that CV out of there. This jounce stop has just been spinning and spinning in the mount, and rather than dick around with it, I've just chopped it down for the time being to allow me to get this CV out of here. And it now fits. So we got her. Now I am going to replace that axle seal. I guess I don't have to, mine's not weeping, but I've got this far, I might as well do it. The replacement seal is 90311-47027 from Toyota, and that'll set you back about 35 bucks. Just get my little pry bar in here and I'll pry that seal out. It's not in there with a great amount of force. And there she is. One old seal. Now on my new seal, I'm going to spread a little bit of grease around the perimeter here. There's a couple of schools of thought about whether this is necessary or not, or whether it should even be done. However, I have done this with my seals for the last 40 years and not had any problems, so I'm in the camp of put a little lube on it to facilitate it sliding into place. Okay, got myself a small hammer and a punch. Just tap this little sucker into place. Okay, that seal's knocked in place. My original one was slightly recessed from this face here on the diff housing, so I did the same. Then I put a little bit of grease around the running face on the seal here as well. Okay, let's jump over to the CV. Alrighty, I'm gonna throw some grease on the running surfaces for that seal and on the spline on my new CV. Again, just to help it slide into place. Now on the end of this CV shaft is this little circlip that locates into the diff. Now a little trick is to clock this thing the right way. So as you can see, when it's sitting down like that and you slide it into the diff, it could bang onto that face there and be very difficult to get in. If you clock it around the other way so that the opening is facing down, then when you're pushing it in, it can push this clip together and allow that to slide in. And to hold that little circlip in place, I'm just going to give it a generous dolloping of grease. All right, now time to put our CV in and blow a foo-foo valve. Heavy, unwieldy things they are. Support your CV so it doesn't crush your seal when you're sliding it in. Okay, I've got it located in the splines. Now I need to push it past that retaining clip. Okay, got it after a significant amount of grunting. You can check that it's seated by the little gap where that oil splash shield is. It should only be 1 millimeter or so between the diff housing and that splash shield. And that's what we've got. So one end fixed. And now for this end. All right, well, lube up this mating surface on the other end of the CV. I like to lube the mating surfaces one at a time because then you don't have to fight with goo on this end while you're trying to get the other end in. Sometimes when you're lubing these things up, you get carried away and you just go, oh yeah, that end needs it and that end needs it. But you're actually working against yourself if you do that. Nice, that's all lubed up. The back side of the hub is all lubed up. Let's send her home. Again, after a little bit of jostling around, we got her. She's seated in. Let's do up that nut. Now before I torque this sucker down, I'll do up those two on the bottom of the lower control arm. And the Jaffa Adventures mascot has returned. Sonny's out in the shed giving me a hand. And I use that term very loosely. Oh, you get to clean the knee off. Thank you. Now we'll start these little puppies. Just need to line that hub up a little bit. Now because these are on this lower ball joint, it's easy enough to swing it around and manipulate it to try and line these bolts up. That's it, that's number one started. And hopefully the second will follow in nicely because it's already lined up. And there she goes, number two. Twisting them in a couple of times just by hand before I put the machine on them. That's it, lower bolt's done. Okay, onto our nut. Now the factory spec is to do this up to 250 Newton meters, then back it off, and then redo it up to 350 Newton meters. My torque wrench only goes up to 200 Newton meters. So what I'm gonna do is I got the Ugga Dugga on its low setting. I'll run it on, then I'll back it off, and then I'll put it on its high setting and I'll send it home. And that's about the best that I can do. Am I worried about that nut coming off? Absolutely not. And the reason for that is we've got this locking collar and our split pin. Now you've got brand new split pins, right? Yes, because I don't want to see you using those old crusty ones. There we go. Done. Now my dust cap has got a couple of dings and smacks on it. I don't know where that's come from, but that was before I purchased the car. So where those dings are, I'm just gonna run a little bit of silicone around there, just to try and keep the water out of here. But that's certainly not necessary if your cap's in good condition. You might have noticed as well that I've taken a wire wheel and I've cleaned up any of the rust out of there. There's just a little bit of silicone on the banged up area. And we'll send our dust cap home. You can hear the note change when that cap bottoms out and you know to stop whaling. Bit of brake clean on the rotor because I got some fingerprints on it. Do up our brake line with the 12mm bolt that we pulled out. Tell me, have you ever got a ratchet spanner and put it on the right way the first time? Far out. It's like USB ports. How many people have plugged the USB in and got it the right way around the first go? It just doesn't happen. All right, brake lines are fixed. So double checking. That end of the CV's in properly. That end of the CV's in properly. We did up our big nut. We put our split pin in, got our dust cap on, cleaned our brake rotor, and ran these two bolts down on the bottom ball joint. Now the only thing left for me to do is fill the diff up with oil. Now you don't need to drain the diff to swap your CVs out. I drained my diff just because I was doing a routine maintenance at that time, and that's when I happened to notice the ripped CV boot on the old CV. So I'll top my diff up, put my wheel back on, take it for a test drive. Bob's your uncle. This job might seem intimidating, but it's something that pretty much anybody can take on at home. If I was gonna guess without filming from go to woe, I'd probably be looking at 45 minutes to an hour to swap that CV out. It's not a bad job. And if you're watching this, I'm assuming you own a 200 series, and if you own a 200 series, there's a good chance at some point in your life, you may be doing a CV. Thanks for watching, everybody. Keep the shiny side up. Bye now.